This is going to be a very interesting one. This is a tinyML application in agriculture, I believe. Okay, let's start it.
Plant growth and LAI estimation using quantized embedded regression models for high throughput phenotyping. Natural plant growth cycles can be extremely slow, hindering the experimental process of phenotyping. Machine learning based high throughput phenotyping is a potential solution to the phenotyping bottleneck, promising to accelerate the experimental cycles within phenomic research. Greenhouse growing genetically modified crops need to be maintained in constant environmental and simulated conditions, and plant growth is inclusive of multiple environmental variables, and yield maximization approaches are experimental to finding the optimum derived value for these variables. The solution consists of a real-time computer vision-based regression analysis to predict crop growth patterns and leaf area index, offering a holistic approach to experimental cycles. The objective of such an approach is to enable temporal analysis of biomass from frames and allow adapting to the plant environment and factors objectively. The dataset used to train the model was adopted from the paper Growth Monitoring by Greenhouse Lettuce by Zhang et al. The other dataset was augmented version of the raw dataset synthesized and generated with all images having similar light luminance and saturation. A translated motion blur of zero point 0.5 was added to the dataset to enable data capture even during translation motion of motorized mechanic plates. The camera setup was as follows. The distance between the imaging tool and the plant was set to be 78 centimeters in the duration of 56 days, and this contributed to increase in the LAI of the observed plant. Raw features were then ingested into the EdgeImpulse Studio, and processed features for the image were obtained. These processed features were then used to train the model dataset. A total of 154 samples were ingested, and 154 training features were then obtained. A convolutional neural network was then designed with a convolutional 2D layer for the model. RGB images of 128 into 128 size were ingested into the model. A loss function of 0.51 was obtained with an inferencing time of 1.5 seconds, which enables real-time data collection system as well as regression modeling system. An O2 threshold system was then deployed to test the efficacy of the model and compare the LAI of ground truth and predicted model dataset. The images were then thresholded, and the noise in the images was then binarized, with the final image used to calculate the leaf area index of the plant. Per pixel area was calculated to be 0.0265 and used to calculate the total biomass. For LAI less than 10 centimeters square, a noise constraint was induced, which was removed by binarizing the images. A sample density for segmented leaf area index to day-wise progression was plotted, which observed some anomalies which the model learned very well. A root mean square error of just 1.1859 centimeters square was observed for about 19 samples ingested in the EdgeImpulse Studio, and the deviation index was found to be minus 0.2351 centimeters square. The test dataset observed 100% accuracy over all images uploaded in the EdgeImpulse Studio. The RMSE was compared to the ground truth LAI and predicted LAI. An increase of exponential function was observed in both the plots. The model was then deployed using EdgeImpulse Studio to the Sony Spresense Cortex M4 chip, and the setup is as follows. An extension board with a main board and camera board was used in this setup. The approximate distance between the camera and plant was estimated to be 78 centimeter, which was kept constant during live classification as well. These images show samples of plant live classification conducted on this dataset and model, and achieved nearly 100% accuracy of all other samples.
So thank you, Dhruv, for sharing this. It's a very, very interesting piece of research. Well, first question is a very basic question. So the leaf area index, how is it defined? Is it just like the area that is covered by the leaf versus the whole area? What is the definition of the leaf area index?
So in my research, I defined it as the area occupied by the leaf per unit of 128 by 128 pixels occupied by the plant. So for a cultivar that we use, we defined 1 centimeter, 1 pixel to be approximately a certain centimeter square that was observed in the dataset, and then for the number of pixels that we collected for the leaf area in one image sample, we defined it as number of pixels per unit area of 128 by 128 pixels of the RGB image.
Okay, thank you. Then I also noticed, and that's kind of more a real life scenario question, that your data sets, they're kind of a little bit idealistic in a way that you have a plant and they have a white background in many cases. So in real life, let's say if you have this kind of plant in a garden or somewhere in the field, you have all kind of things happening. You have some wanted leaves and maybe unwanted plants. So how do you deal with this? Or your technique will just measure all area occupied by plants, regardless if it's wanted or unwanted type of species?
So for the unwanted background in these samples, so definitely they are contributing to the whole model and training as a whole, and they are increasing the complexity. The ideal use case was used so that the model achieves, so the model can be tested on an initial phase of dataset. But then for these complex datasets, we can use vegetation indices such as excessive green or excessive red, and then those features can be extracted so to remove the background complexity, and then finally obtain just the leaf segmentation part, and then ingest that into the dataset to enable a biomass leaf area index calculation. So because of the complexity of the background, the model might not perform well with the real-time inferencing, as well as the low cost, low computation, and just the real-time inferencing system. But then using these systems like implementing vegetation and dicing thresholds, we can remove the complexity of the backgrounds, and just the excessive grain vegetation of the plant can be extracted, which can be modeled in the neural network.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite interesting use case. And yes, it will be interesting to test it in a kind of a more realistic scenario when you have more challenging background and to see what kind of accuracy you receive. And talking about the data sets, you mentioned this, you use a data set from the paper. I'm wondering how big was this data set? How many samples were in that data set, the one you used to train your model?
So there were 3 samples of lettuce plants, from lettuce Flandria to there were other 2 types of lettuce samples. And for each sample cultivar, there were 154 images. So the model trained very well on just a sample of 154 images, and then gave a loss function of 0.51 on one of the data sets. And the other ones were then used to map the error in defining other types of labels. So first, in the first data set, we use labels in the form of the LAI ground truth. And in the second data set, we use the day-wise regression labels, for example, 1, 2, 3. So while that did not achieve a high accuracy, the ones which used the label with ground truth achieved a high accuracy on regression models, which indicated that the model can learn from the exact values very well instead of the day-wise progression results.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I'm just, so basically you're saying that you use 150 positive images for training, and how many positive samples you use for testing?
I use the 19 samples provided in the dataset for testing, and all of them achieved an accuracy of 100% as defined by the error bound rate of the EdgeImpulse Studio. So might be somewhat of a 4 centimeter square error rate, and with that it achieved an accuracy of 100% as defined by the EdgeImpulse Studio.
And my last question is again more kind of a pragmatic question, not so much model related. So your model by definition is a 2D model, two-dimensional model, right? And we know that in real life vegetation happens in a 3D manner as it's supposed to do. How do you kind of deal with this 2D versus 3D kind of more again a real life scenario?
So yeah, that's an interesting use case, integrating depth like in the form of feature vectors, normalized depth overall, pixels, integrating that as a feature, and then modeling the 2D convolutional networks that could be possible. Integrating 3D images might be too expensive on computation. So for real-time inferencing, that might not be an ideal case, but we can use somewhat like a depth sensing network for like normalizing all the pixels to a certain value, and then using a mean of those pixels to calculate the height of the plant, and then using that as a feature vector for with the 2D convolutional networks. That seems a possible case and an implementable use case. So definitely looking forward to try that in the future implementation of the model. So that sounds interesting.
Great, thank you. Well, we look forward to your updates as you do more research in this space, but really very interesting use case. Thank you.
Thank you to our strategic partners who supported us, especially some of the key partners here. We've got ARM who help with hardware and software. The what's called EdgeImpulse for developers on the libraries. Qualcomm Advanced AI Research as well for their support in edge computing. Scintillate around hardware and ML training pipeline. So definitely thank you as well. Platinum sponsors, Reality AI for advanced sensing with product and tinyML. Renesas for microcontrollers and microcomputers. Our gold sponsors, Sladen.ai, adaptive AI for the intelligent edge. Maxim Integrated, enabling edge intelligent devices. Seed Hardware, who also had present today. I'll quickly go back to them. Thank you once again for all your support. SenseML, build smart IoT sensor devices for data. SynthSets, and our silver sponsors. So thank you once again. It's been a great few days. Look forward to 2022, as mentioned before, and hopefully see you at some of the future tinyML events. Thank you.